Hello, my name is Lou Pierozzi, and today we're going to be discussing installation art. A little bit about its history, but it's not going to be an all-inclusive top conversation about installation art. I feel like there's been a lot of this that's already sort of been covered already. So we're going to take a look at this in terms of us being artists and how do we want to maybe approach installation art. Okay, so maybe at first how we might want to think about it, and then to sort of start to formulate an idea to how to go about creating it. So what is installation art? Well, it's artwork that's created for a specific location, such as a museum or gallery. All right, another way to think about it could be a room, it could be a yard. There's a lot of variables here. This artwork usually has multiple objects, and the artist uses every element of that space to create the vision for the artwork. Installation art can use the primary space of the location. So you start to think about the floors, the ceilings, or the walls. And even light and sound can really be used in terms of installation art. So if we have to talk about like a great example of installation art, just to think about it, is sort of a haunted house. When I was a kid, they were really popular amongst churches. Churches would host these haunted houses in the basements of their church or auditoriums, and every element within these, they'd have a bunch of rooms, and you'd walk through it, and every little detail was sort of planned out, and you'd go in, you go from one room, maybe it's like a Frankenstein room, and the next room's like a Dracula room, but that's kind of a good example if you just want to start to think about it. Okay, it can be one space, it can be multiple spaces. This is probably like a picture out of Blair Witch that you're looking at here, but that kind of gives you an idea of how you might want to think about it. I think as we, again, getting back to that idea that we're artists, and that's how you're going to really want to start to think about it. And one of the first things you'll want to do is think about the location, okay? How artists may deal with it, or you as an individual may want to deal with it. Again, you may be thinking about a specific room in your house, or maybe your backyard, or maybe there's a common area outside that you'd be interested in creating installation art. A lot of times installation art is sort of found in galleries or museums. So if we take a look at this piece here, Forest of Numbers, this is a good example, okay? It incorporates all elements of the room. The viewer is invited to explore the area and, sort of identify what the work is about. Really love this piece a lot. I kind of came across this while I was searching to put this PowerPoint together, and it's just really interesting. If we notice, it's a box with sort of very interesting patterns on it, and then the light sort of reflects off and fills that entire room. So every inch of that is. And then when the viewers or people go in, or the audience goes in, they sort of, that room begins to change by the natural light, the light that's being produced. So it's constantly ever changing. And again, that's kind of an inside space. In some ways, I've shown this before. A team lab, really interesting group. You can kind of go in there. This is a very interactive, done with electronics. Okay, so a little different than the person I showed you before, but really incorporates all the elements of that specific room or rooms. The other thing you want to think about is there can even be different way of thinking about the space. So in this particular case, it's a shopping mall. I'm guessing, just judging by the view. But the artist has chosen to really focus in on the ceiling as the primary way where he wants his viewers or audience to explore it. So, you can think about all those different elements, right? The ceiling, the floor, all of it. Here's another example, okay, of really using the ceiling is the primary spot, but then you bring that thing that's up from the ceiling back down to the floor, and you sort of incorporate that entire space. Now, I thought this one was interesting. So in Ohio, there's this place called Otherworld. It's like an old abandoned mall, and so they're, now is the time they're sort of reinventing these spaces. And so 40 artists decided to come together and sort of fill up 47 rooms with like more sci-fi and fantasy related arts. And it's near Columbus, Ohio, is the location of this. And I think, now that we're seeing a lot of abandoned malls, it's kind of an interesting way of dealing with these sort of vacuum spaces that don't really have a whole lot going on, and really may not have anything going on for a while. So artists are kind of coming in there and creating things. So if we take a look at this is sort of one of the rooms. And then here's some other imagery. Okay, so a little more sci-fi, Halloween kind of thing, but interesting space nonetheless, right? Just kind of a fun approach. And here's another angle or room. And I think there's a few of these locations. I don't think it's just this Columbus, Ohio. I think there's one like in London and a few other locations. So now we're going to talk about it as artists. So, Jason Taylor, if we're talking about space, he uses the outdoors, okay, so a little bit different than the sort of indoor spaces, and actually underwater. So you go underwater, you have to really, know how to scuba, or really seriously know how to hold your breath, to check out this sort of installation art. And if you notice, it's multiple pieces, right? We have this sort of wall, we have these multiple figures. You're going to want to swim or move around these figures. And, this is sort of a close up of it. And I think they're all over really underwater. But kind of an interesting installation piece, right? Here's another example of an outdoor piece. Now, this is a single piece, but look at how it's sort of occupying a lot of space. This is what's kind of, in some way, installation art is a lot of participatory sculpture. What does that mean? It means the viewer is sort of involved with it, kind of engaged and becoming a part of it. In this case, you see this person sitting in there, really sort of, being involved with the piece to some degree, right? Christo made a living at doing a lot of these things. So if we take a look at this is titled Floating Pier. You as the viewer are asked to sort of walk across this and sort of, check out this, I don't know if it's a house or whatever it is, on this little island. And again, a good example of installation art, really controlling all the elements. So another way we want to think about is a few areas that we've already covered, ways to involve the viewer. So how do we get the viewer to be excited about the things that we're doing, engage with what we're doing? We talked about it was like tactile, engaging curiosity, scale. There was a bunch of those. So you might want to review those. I think there were 7 in all. And then elements of art, right? So space, light, color. So you can incorporate all of these things to create a really neat, environment for people to explore. So Ai Weiwei is the name of this artist. He's a very famous Chinese artist. He created this really beautiful piece that's called The Law of the Journey, and it's really speaking about immigrants and refugees and how we treat them. And he's making a really big statement. He's filling up this entire room, and making that narrative about the rough life that these people have. So if we're looking at this in, again, involving the viewer, what's the way that the artist is sort of drawing that in is content. Okay, so what is content? What the artist says about something. So he is making a statement. The poor, disenfranchised immigrants, refugees, displaced people, and how sort of indifferent we are to them, which is unfortunate, right? And here's different angles. You see the figure down on the bottom trying to grab the attention of the big raft, and then some people that sort of fell out. Okay, so it's all part of that. And again, that relates to content and telling us that story of that, we should have some compassion for these people. Another, there's like a dozen environmental artists came together. And here's another piece that sort of talks about content. And it's titled Arcadia Earth. And it's really about climate change. And so they're trying to make this statement about it. And I think it's a lot of upcycled materials and reusable materials to create this really, enormous space. There were a bunch of images. So, I encourage you to go check it out. It was in New York a while ago. I think the group is probably still working on this. But again, making a statement about climate change. Yeah, look at this. Kind of neat, right? These really cool spaces that the viewers are encouraged to explore. Now, to kind of changing subjects, now we're going to kind of talk about those elements of art. And some of these artists we've seen before. I always try to give you some fresh new imagery, but I think these are also really good. So the elements of our art that we're seeing here from James Turrell is light and color. Okay, so if we're going to make a space, what can we do with it? Okay, we've talked about content a little bit. We're going to talk about some other things, but in this particular case, look at the use of light. Okay, the light to the dark, right? And then just the color of it itself is sort of really vivid purple and sort of this really like fuchsia color. I think it's just really neat. And then playing around with different spaces and using that light and that color to create some really interesting spaces, right? Found this artist on the internet. I gotta say, I love it. I love it. I've just really some cool stuff. This could also, you could make an argument, it's a lot of things, right? It's not just one thing. We kind of talked about, we could make an argument. This is using color a lot. Textile or tactile quality here. And so what do we mean by that is relating to touch. Not so much an element of art. I should probably put a way to involve the viewer. Okay, it's more of that. It's not really an element of art. But let's take a look at this. I mean, look at these surfaces here. Just fascinating surfaces. Again, this isn't so much an element of art as it is involving the viewer, as relating to the sense of touch. Okay, and it's made with melted wax and colored pigment. And so if we look at it, I mean, you can really, I'd want to really touch this surface. I mean, it's just, I don't want to damage it, but I certainly would want to get in there and take a look at that. So another way we might want to think about that as artists is the materials. Like, so if we're going to create a space, a location, what's the materials are we going to use? Are we going to buy things? Are we going to create a lot of things? Like, what are we going to use? So this is just a few ways that you might want to think about it. One thing we can think about is natural materials, right? In a lot of cases, they're free. You can go outside and you can find sticks and twigs and grass and do all sorts of stuff. And that might be good. So this is Robert Smithson's work. It's called the Spiral Jetty. Probably just get yourself a bulldozer, right? And then, some rocks, and then you can create this space. This is quite large. If, in this image, we don't have a person, but people are really small on this. And this is sort of a timepiece too, right? I mean, after erosion is going to make this disappear over time. And, that's kind of the artist's intent as well. Another, Andy Goldworthy is a good example of somebody who likes to use sort of these natural materials to create these interesting spaces and stuff. And so if we look at this, you can go in there, it's a lot of rocks, okay, and then there's some pieces around. These are more single pieces, but you can probably make an argument that it's installation art, right? You get a sense of that whole sense of space. Maybe there's a few of these in this area. This is something straight out of Blair Witch Trial. I think I wouldn't want to go there. That'd probably creep me out quite a bit, but some interesting approach, right? to using natural materials. Another thing we could talk about is everyday and found objects. Okay, so they're all kind of interchangeable, everyday or found objects. So Pepe Osario, look at the combination that he has in his barber shop. Okay, so we've got some hubcaps. Have this sort of Jesus figure there. And then he fills this whole space. If we look at these barber chairs, they're sort of decorated. And then he's got these pictures on the wall, just really creating all these, everyday objects sort of put together for this really sort of artistic way of working with the material. Here's another neat example, just taking lights. Lamps, I'm sorry. Lamps or lights or whatever you'd like to call them. And then just sort of filling an outdoor space. It's just kind of beautiful. This reminds me of Chinese lanterns in some ways, and how they may deal with the outdoors. Just really beautiful. And they complement the natural surroundings really well. Okay. And as a viewer, you're going to want to explore all the way to the back and sort of be engaged with that space. These images are shown, I think, in the last PowerPoint, but you can get it again. You can get an idea. So if we look at Patrick Marcelli's pieces, these are just toys. I don't know if I doubt he bought them all, but he might have picked them up. Great place to pick stuff up is like Goodwill or your friends. But these are all toys on strings. This is at the Ken Line Museum at Oakton Community College. I didn't see the show, but I've heard rumors it was really awesome. So, it's a great space. Nathan Harpaz is our gallery director there. He does a really fantastic job of bringing in some really tremendous artists. If we look at the image in the middle, just some chairs, right? Some chairs stacked, filling up the space in the room. And if we take a look at this, we've got a combination of, sort of engaging curiosity. They don't feel like they feel like they go together, but we don't really understand. It's creating those visual puzzles we don't immediately understand, and then we're filling up that whole space. So another great material to work with that's relatively inexpensive is recycled materials. So you might want to think about that. In this particular case, we're taking all these plastic bottles and arranging them according to color in some ways, and we're filling up this space. Or on the right, we're taking flip-flops. Some of them are kind of disgusting if you really take a look at them, but they make for a really interesting piece, right? As they're sort of laid on the floor and they're arranged, really by color as well. I thought this was interesting. So this is what we're called the water lilies in bloom, and it's made up of CDs. So just kind of brought together in an interesting shape. I think CDs are kind of on their way out. They've probably been on their way out for 20 years. So, they're probably pretty easy to pick up. You could probably go to a pawn shop and, I think you get like 10 for $1. So, it's a good recyclable material, and apparently they float, right? Or kind of looks like that. Maybe not. Maybe there's some things that make them float, but again, interesting recyclable material. Here's some other ones. So if we take a look at this image on the right, and I've shown these three before, but again, this is just some balls, volleyball, soccer balls, painted blue, and then in here we have a lot of, like buckets of food, like maybe a KFC big bucket, and then just kind of stacked and create this really interesting space. And then over here, we have just a bunch of recyclable materials, odds and ends really, but it creates for sort of this aqua installation art. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed my presentation on installation art. Think of it now, maybe you'll want to create a piece using a specific location. It's a lot of fun. Again, my name is Lou Pierozzi, and I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Have a great day.